Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Wendy Dillard here. Today is Monday, January the 8th, 2018. This is our second Daily Dose of Happy, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And Wendy, this is a auspicious beginning to the week because our weather has warmed up. We are no longer in single digits.
Oh, yay for you. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, we actually reached 30. It was a heat wave. Oh, my goodness. I mean, the cats didn't know what to do with themselves. They said, well, wait a minute. It's not too cold. I can go out for more than 30 seconds.
Yay. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. I know I've got some coworkers that have some special things that they're going to be, flying from one part of the country over the next couple days. And so those are things I always take into consideration when I hear about weather. And so I set the intention that the weather will be good for them in terms of flying, and the airports will be open, and they won't have any delays. So, yeah,
Absolutely.
You've confirmed that because they travel tomorrow. Yay.
Very, very good. All right. Well, yeah, definitely. We wish them a smooth and happy flight because that's what they really need. So any good wins going on? Anything really neat going on that we should talk about?
Well, I'm just excited because I'm on the first day of 5 days off from my day job.
Oh, yeah.
And,
yeah, that's really good.
It's a totally different feeling. I got involved with some stuff today that just, personal stuff that I wanted to work on. Mm-hmm. And it's like it so was able to captivate my attention, and I was working and thinking from a really good place. And that's just not something I get a chance to do when I'm working my day job. I mean, yes, I get to feel great while I'm working, but this was all for me, and I don't get a whole lot of time to just spend for me.
Oh, and we need to do that. That's just so important, spending me time. I mean, I don't know about you. I think you probably do anyway. I try to make every minute me time, but it's not always easy. Sometimes you just got straining on other stuff.
But I like me time to be where the subject of whatever I'm working on is totally just for me.
Yeah.
And I can't do that necessarily when I'm doing a day job. I still do a great job of feeling up, looking for positive aspects, connecting with people in a way that makes me feel good. But when I get to do stuff all for me, it's awesome. Like for this weekend, I normally wouldn't have spent this much time doing it, but because I knew I had a whole week ahead of me, it was a luxury to do it. Mm-hmm. But I don't know how you or other people are with their personal inbox, but, I'm on so many people's lists that I get so much mail. Oh, my goodness. I do my best every day to delete stuff I know I don't want to read.
Yeah.
But yet the inbox still starts to get really full with stuff that I do want to read. I glance through it and I go, ooh, there's a good article, or, oh, there's a good recipe, or, ooh, I want to see what this person's up to. And so I took the luxury this weekend to just go through my inbox and watch the videos. Like I have people who send me Abraham or my attention.
Oh, we just had a technical glitch and we lost all of that, I'm sorry to say. I just recovered us, fortunately, but we just went blank for about 45 seconds, so I apologize about that. And I apologize for cutting you off because you had a great story to tell there, so... Can you tell it again?
So I wonder what part, do you happen to remember what the last thing was that you heard?
Not really. I was just in panic mode trying to figure out how to get the sound back.
Okay. Well, then I'll just tell the story again. So pardon me for listeners if you're going to hear a little bit of repeat. But one of the things that I did, and it was such a luxury for me over the weekend, was that I looked at my inbox for my personal email, which, gets so out of control because I'm on so many people's different lists. And so even though during the week I normally am pretty good at least looking at stuff going, oh, delete, this is not stuff I care about, But there are always those emails that matter to me. I want to know what's going on with somebody in particular, or, oh, that looks like a good offer, or, just there's something, or like, oh, there's a great recipe and I want to print that. And so there's always this huge amount of stuff in my inbox waiting for my attention.
Okay.
But the thing that really was important is I have this one gal that likes to post to one of the groups I'm in with Abraham, and she posts new Abraham clips.
Okay.
And I don't like to listen to those unless I can be really present and really hear the essence of what Abraham is saying. And so here's what my luxury Sunday looked like. I was sitting in my recliner with the sun shining in. Yes, I'm in Texas. The sun does shine here. And I'd listen to Abraham, and I'd go, that was so good, and I'd listen again. And sometimes I'd listen a third time.
Ooh.
Because it was just that juicy. And so I just had the whole day permeating my thoughts with Abraham thoughts that were connecting to questions that I had been asking. And at the end of the day, dun, 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 I got my inbox down to 11, but none of them required action. Those were all 11 representing I'm waiting on responses from other people.
Oh, well, that's complete.
To me, me, the organizational freak, I love knowing my inbox has been managed.
Yeah.
And it's not waiting on me. And plus, I got to spend the day listening to Abraham, and it was awesome. It was an awesome weekend, and then that set me up for today being my first day off from my day job, where I could just fill the day with Wendy-ness.
Well, you got a lot of good stuff going on then. That's great. That's terrific. That's like, what when do I get my turn? That's how good that sounds. That's great.
I don't know. Take it today. Take it tomorrow. Take it all week. Have a vacation while I'm taking a vacation.
Actually, I did have one good thing happen that was really good today. I've mentioned before that despite being a devotee of Abraham Hicks, I hadn't actually read all the books. And so I decided, well, I'm going to get the other books that I haven't gotten. And there were 3 of them that I still didn't have, so I ordered them, and they all arrived today. So I have a nice long reading list to address. I'm getting pretty excited about that. Yeah.
That is exciting. Good for you.
And believe it or not, one of the books that I have not yet read is The Law of Attraction. Now, you would think I would have read that one by now.
And that's like my favorite.
I don't know why it is I never read it, but I just never did. Somehow I started off with Asking It Is Given, and then went on to Money and the Law of Attraction, and then I just kind of stopped at that point. Didn't even go into the Vortex, and my wife gave me the Vortex for Christmas, so that got me going, But I just never had gotten to the rest of them. It's just one of those things. I don't know.
What's interesting for me is I've been listening to Abraham via, once upon a time it was cassettes, and then it was CDs. And I've been listening to CDs for so long that when I would buy their books, it wasn't the same experience for me.
Oh.
I mean, I could hear Esther's voice or Jerry's voice, in my head while I was reading, but I guess I had gotten so used to it being conversational that it was hard for me to read through the book. Sometimes I'd have to say, Wendy, you really want to get the content. Just, I'd get aligned and then I'd read it, but I couldn't ever read a whole lot in one sitting.
Well, I do know that Louise has had trouble, particularly with Asking It Is Given, because of the repetitiveness of the way the content is presented. I mean, they do a lot of repeating of concepts, which is understandable. I mean, they're trying to present it to a mass audience, and so repeating concepts is a good way of kind of drilling them home. But she found them to be too much, and I have to admit, they do it a lot. They do it probably more than they need to, for my taste anyway. But I was able to get past that because I wanted to get at the meat that was underneath it. And in fact, Louise and I met a new friend yesterday who's also into the Law of Attraction. He lives nearby. And we were having a conversation in a local coffee shop. And one of the things we all agreed on was that there are 2 levels to Abraham Hicks books. There's the surface levels, what you just read on the surface, and that's the part that's really repetitive. And then there's the secondary level, the deep level. And you have to kind of really study the books to get to the second level. But when you get to that second level, it's like you're reading a whole new piece of a book, and you're wondering, where was this the first time? Why did I miss this? You know what I mean? It's like stuff appears that wasn't there before.
And I've experienced that with the CDs, or even by listening to YouTube. And I guess I wouldn't necessarily think of it in terms of there's the surface and then there's the deeper. I think it's all depending upon where you are in your personal growth and what you're ready for.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know I had, when I was I used to be enrolled in what's called the master's program.
Oh, right.
Which is where you would get the unedited version of every workshop they did.
Right.
And when Jerry was alive, sometimes they were doing like 5 workshops a month.
Wow.
And each one was 4 full 1-hour CDs.
Oh, boy.
So, yeah, think about that. That's what, 4 times 5.
It's 20 hours.
20. Yeah, and I would listen to them while I was working at a job where I would commute every day, and I listened to every one a minimum of 3 times before I moved on to the next
one. So 60 hours. 60 hours a month on that. Oh, my goodness.
I was doing massive listening. And what was interesting is I would take in what I could, and then after I did that for about 5 months, I realized I was now having such a backup where I hadn't listened to them that I quit the program because I needed to catch up on what I had already purchased.
Yeah, sure.
And then once I got through them all, I said to myself, I'm going to go back through them all again.
Wow.
Before I make a decision to buy more. And here's what's so fascinating to me. You know, here maybe it's 5 months later, and I'm re-listening to something I hadn't heard in 5 months. And I think to myself, oh, these are like new concepts. Oh, my God, I so missed this the first time. And simultaneously, I was like, oh, ooh, I've already made that a regular practice.
That's nice.
And so it was so cool that I went through the 5 months of them all again that when I was done, I said, let's do it again.
Wow.
So I now listen to the same 5 months worth now on my third go-around. And notice I still listen to every CD 3 times before I move on to the next. So, I mean, talk about big-time immersion and repetition.
Yeah, I can't say I can come close to that. That far exceeds anything I've done.
Well, I'm a crazy woman when it comes to things like this. And that's what I did when I listened to Tony Robbins.
Oh, okay.
And I learned the Tony Robbins stuff so well, and that style really worked for me.
Oh, okay.
So I did it when I got Abraham tapes. But what I found was I was integrating the information. And, you know, even within the 5 months worth, it's not like they didn't repeat themselves 100 million times.
Oh, sure.
But for me, sometimes it took that 100 million times before I really got it.
It was 100 million and one that did it. When you finally got the 100 million and one, then you got it.
And yes, I exaggerated that number, of course. But the point is, the same thing for me when I'd read the books, is that I recognized that who I was at any given point was different than any other time I might have heard that same information.
Okay.
And so I think by the time I'd read the books, I had listened so much and had integrated so much that a lot of it felt very repetitious to me.
Oh, okay.
Where I'll bet if I had read the books first and had never listened to the CDs or YouTube, I'll bet it would have all felt brand new.
Well, I've kind of wondered that myself, if I had done it in order that they were published. Because I found out someplace on the web, I can't remember where, I found the original tapes from their first introduction that they did back in the 1980s to Abraham, where they did like a recording, and you could tell they're doing it in their house and so on. And listen, it's basically their story about how Abraham came into their lives. And one of the things that really caught my attention is in the very early stages, Esther sounds like she's trying to do like a foreign language version of English when she's doing it. She's rolling her R's, and it's almost like there's this weird, you know, European accent coming through or something like that. It's not European.
I remember that.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't know when that shifted, but I'm thinking you could almost hear that she was trying so desperately to present this as the separate entity so that people wouldn't confuse it with her, you know. And then over time, obviously, that just became a non-issue, and then she just talked normally. But I just found it fascinating.
There once was a time she had to stand behind a podium because receiving Abraham was so powerful as it went through her, it literally caused her to be unstable.
Really?
She had to hold on.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Huh, I didn't know that.
And so through her own development of being able to raise her own vibrational level to be more in sync with Abraham's level, that's when she was able to walk away from the podium.
Interesting.
And there was a time she was completely behind the podium the whole time. And then there came a time that she could just hold the podium with one hand and move away from it.
Oh, okay.
And now when she does her workshops, she doesn't have a podium at all.
Uh-huh.
She's able to stand there and say, okay, bye-bye now, and then she would let Abraham in, and she'd be in speaking.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I guess that makes sense. I mean, because if we really do believe, and I do, that this is truly a non-physical group of entities talking through her, I can see where that could take a little while to get used to it. I mean, the first time it happened to me, I'd probably be on the floor in a dead faint. So,
yeah.
I mean, that's like that would fall into the realm of, is this crazy?
Well, and I remember back in, I think it was 2007, 2008, when I started the master's program, she still had some what I would call affected speech, where it wasn't completely her.
Yeah.
But over the years, she has dropped that, and I think as she has gotten more comfortable in the whole experience, now she sounds just like her.
Which is good.
However, her sound man has said that there is a distinctly different sound pattern when she's speaking as Abraham versus when she's speaking as herself.
I believe that's true, because just from what I've heard of interviews with her and then interviews with her as Abraham, the tonality of her voice changes. And I don't know of anyone who knows how to change their tonality. I mean, you can change your accent, you can talk in a high register or a low register, but changing tonality, that's pretty hard to do. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure exactly how that happens.
As much as I adore Esther, I don't think she's that brilliant to have figured out that ability to alter her sound quality.
Well, I wouldn't know, but I'll take your word for it. But actually, this kind of ties in now that I think about it, because what we're talking about is how she has learned over the years to really help people as the voice of Abraham, and certainly millions of people have been very positively affected by her help. But it does raise a question, and the question is one that you came up with for the topic, and the topic basically being, if I can help, should I? Why should I help, and why shouldn't I? Depending on how you want to look at it. And I thought it was a really interesting topic. Now, Abraham actually does have some stuff to talk about on this, don't they?
Absolutely. I mean, one of my things, because as you noted so beautifully the other day, you said, well, I've known you for, a month plus, and yes, I do recognize that you had been quite the people pleaser, which part of me was like, oh, yay, he acknowledged the change in me, and the other part was like, oh, wow, he noticed that I had been quite the people pleaser.
Didn't mean to take the covers off there, but...
It's who I am. It's part of my story. And I mean, I was raised to be a huge people pleaser. I learned that one very naturally from the people in my world. But, I came to recognize at a certain point in time that being the ultimate enabler and enabling everybody and helping everybody was actually robbing people of their ability to learn for themselves what they needed to learn. And I was making people dependent on me. And so that was a double-edged sword, because I liked the feeling of helping people. I love that people acknowledged me for it, admonished me, thanked me, like, oh, my God, what would I do without you? But the other side of the coin is that there was an obligation, because now when somebody was in trouble that I had been helping for so long, even if I didn't have the time, or I didn't think I did, I felt obligated to be there for them, and I would drop my own stuff to help other people.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so it was really robbing both of us. It was robbing from me, because there were things I wanted to do for me that now I wasn't doing. But this is the real point as to why I stopped and why I was able to make an abrupt change in my life and not be the people pleaser that I had been groomed to be, is because I realized I was robbing people of the very experiences that they needed to fully grow and develop.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, too, because it actually came up during the podcast this morning with Tom, because Tom pointed out the story of the butterfly that's in the cocoon before it becomes a butterfly, and it needs to beat its wings against the cocoon in order to strengthen its wings, or otherwise it basically dies at birth. which is not a good thing.
I did not know that.
You didn't know that one? Oh, yeah. In fact, that actually, the first time I heard that story was associated with the school that I helped to set up. I think I told you about that one, called the Sudbury Model School. And it was a story that was passed around as a way to encourage staff members to not try to set up classes for the kids, because this was a school where the kids were completely in control of their school day and they could do whatever they wanted to do. And part of the model is just taking your hands off. So the story was told to remind people you want to take your hands off. I think the way the actual tale goes is there's a young boy who goes to a guru on a hill or something, I'm not sure exactly what, and he asks to be coached, to be taught, about the wisdom of the world. And the guru says, well, tell you what, I have here this cocoon. I want you to take care of it. I want you to guard it, make sure that nobody gets at it. But what you must not do is do anything to interfere with it. And watch what happens and learn from the birth of the butterfly that will come out of it, that will emerge. So the boy said, okay, very dutifully took it away. And then the day came where it was trying to hatch, and he could see that there was a motion going on, and he could hear the wings beating against it, and it wasn't getting out. And he became so frantic, he finally pulled the thing open, and the butterfly got out, but within a day it had died. And he couldn't believe it. And he went to the master and said, well, what happened? Well, you did what I told you not to do. It needs to beat its wings against the cocoon. That's the only way it can get strong enough to be able to fly on its own. The moral of the story for the school was, if you want the kids to really develop the way the Sudbury model allows them to, you got to let them make their own mistakes. You got to let them do it their own way. You got to let them follow their own built-in compass. Because if you do that and you allow it to go and go and go, they will exceed every possible dream you have for them. But if you try to interfere, you will get much less than the results you're hoping for.
And you know what? That idea sounds brilliant in theory. It sounds fascinating even in truth, because, I know that mama birds just push their baby birds out of the nest and and if they don't fly, they die.
Right, yeah.
It sounds kind of harsh, but we're kind of used to that in nature. But, for me, who grew up always being a people pleaser, that was a hard thing for me to change. It was a hard thing for me to even recognize or even come to grips with, because I didn't like watching people struggle.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me tell you, for Sudbury parents of Sudbury kids, it's tough for them, too, let me tell you. It's really hard to take your hands off. Oh, boy, because, every single message we get in society is you have to teach your kids how to read early. You have to give them the advantages that they need so that they can get the high grades, so they can get the credentials, so they can go off and have their ideal lives. That's the message, right? That's the message that every parent gets. And then we're asking them to go against that message? Oh, my God. That's huge.
The thought that comes to mind is, because I had 3 younger siblings, I was around to watch each one of them when they went from crawling to walking. And I say that because I don't have children of my own, but I very distinctly remember it with my 3 siblings. But, there's almost an expectation that when they start to pull themselves up and they take their first step, I've never known a kid to stand up and then start running across the room. It's like they take maybe 2 steps, they get really wobbly, and then they go boom, and they fall back down. But, I don't recall my parents or me ever putting our hand up and holding one of, my siblings to try to help them walk. It's like we all leave our hands off and we just watch and see what happens, as though we're watching a baby bird fly out of the nest for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I wonder what happens with us as humans, where we're okay when a baby is learning to walk and we're okay with them falling down.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow when we get older, we want to help everybody. We want to jump in, even a little kid who's maybe 4 years old and learning how to cut with scissors for the first time, if they're not doing something quite right. I know myself, and I've watched other adults jump in and go, no, this is how you do it. Do it this way. Or if they're holding a pencil funny, no, hold it this way. I wonder what happens in us that somehow there's a certain point when a kid is developing that we kick into, no, we have to help them, versus just let them go.
Well, I think that it's probably fear-based. It's the fear. There's probably a lot of fears, a lot of potential fears in that. Probably the main one is the fear that if you don't get involved, then they won't learn it. Which isn't true necessarily, but it's the fear, And it's probably the best cure for it is something that my wife saw. My wife used to work for a time in daycare, and she told a story about how there was this one infant who was just learning how to crawl, but did not want help in crawling or in walking or anything else like that. Instead, this infant by himself figured out how to get himself to crawl and then to walk. And the way he did it, he had a pacifier. And he would take the pacifier out of his mouth and throw it a couple feet ahead and then crawl over to get it. And he'd pick it up, suck on it again, throw it another 2 feet, crawl over to get it. And then he did the same thing with walking.
That's amazing.
And you watch something like that, you say, they don't need any help. They got it. They got this down pat.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really cool little strategy that little one had.
I thought that was great when I heard about that one. Like, whoa.
Well, fast forward now into adulthood, what actually precipitated this topic for me was the other day, my friend Keisha, I've talked about her before. She's been staying with me.
Yep.
And she was having some problems with her laptop.
Okay.
And she got, like, the blue screen of death.
Oh, no.
And it's like, what do I do? And, it had these messages, and I'm like, well, what'd you try? And so she showed me. She said, I've tried this, I've tried this, I've tried this. And she tried everything I would have thought to try. And so finally I said, here, I'm going to give you my niece's cell phone number because she's a tech gal. She doesn't live nearby, but at least you can contact her and see what she has to say. So my niece walked her through all these different system screens, and it was taking forever, and, like, she'd get to the next stage, and Keisha would, like, take a picture with her cell phone, and then she'd text it off to my niece, because my niece was actually at a function, but my niece was so sweet, she, like, still helped my friend. Mm-hmm. So anyway, finally, by the next morning, all the things had cycled, and it was still kind of the blue screen of death, and my niece said, it's really looking like your hard drive is dead. And she was like, I don't know what to do. And my first question was, well, do you have a backup of all your stuff? And she went, a backup? And I went, oops.
Guess not.
So I said, well, at least try to back your stuff up. So she tried, and she said, it's taking forever. It's not working. And then I said, okay, well, I don't know. Well, now here, let me back up and kind of say why this subject came for me. Because when she was first having trouble, my first inclination was to run in and help her. Now, I'm not an IT tech. I mean, I know a little bit of stuff, but, I knew I couldn't help. But yet my inclination was to do that, to race in there and, like, help think through what she was already dealing with.
Which is actually kind of unusual. A lot of people, their first inclination in a technical situation would be to run away as fast as possible. But nevertheless, I mean, that shows your humanity. That shows that you're a kind person and you want to help.
But also, I kind of like tech stuff, and I've dealt with a lot of things because my ex-husband used to be help desk, and so I kind of learned a lot from him, even though, back then it was probably Windows 3.1.
Right.
It was a long time ago. But I've always been interested. So my natural inclination, one, because it's a tech thing, and two, because I was a people pleaser, was to run in and try to help. And so as she was going through this stuff, working with my niece, I would just say, how you doing? She's like, oh, well, we're progressing. I'd say, okay. But I wasn't racing into her room. I wasn't racing in to see what was on her laptop. And I remember sitting watching TV while this was going on, and I kind of felt an internal conflict because I'm like, gosh, I feel like I'm being so cold. Now, I wasn't being cold, but that's how it was. I interpreted it because my lack of jumping in and trying to offer, hands-on assistance, just even if I couldn't do anything, I still felt like I should have done something. Like I still had this natural inclination of obligation to go help and do something. And yet I was internally asking questions like, is there anything I can do to help? And I got, no. Is there anything I should be offering? No. What should I do? And it's like, just sit here. And I'm like, but it feels so, like, not kind, And what just kind of like the guidance that was coming to me is, this is for her to deal with. Let her figure this out. if she needs resources, let her ask the question.
Yes.
But don't just race in before somebody asks a question.
Yes. Exactly right.
And that is the biggest point. And so at one point, we were both downstairs in the kitchen together, and we were just chit-chatting, and, I kind of said, something, and I said, well, because she was asking me a question about backup systems, which I have, and I said, oh, well, I'll show you what that looks like. So we were looking at my laptop, which was downstairs, and while we were talking, it just felt like the right thing to do, and I said, well, have you called any local places to check on like where you can recover data from your hard drive, because I didn't want her to lose her data if at all possible.
Yeah.
And she went, oh, well, I hadn't thought of that. And I said, oh, yeah, I don't know what you call them, but she goes, where do you find it? I said, I don't know, just Google. So she did, because she has a tablet and she has a cell phone. So she started Googling, and she goes, oh, it was Saturday, like at about 3:30. And she goes, oh, I found a place that's really close by. I even know where it is, and they're open until 6. And I said, oh, great. Well, have you called them? She goes, I'm about to. And so she called them. She got good information. She headed on out. And as she headed out the door, I thought about it, and I went, I did get to interact with her to help her, because she hadn't, I've had so many system crashes, I feel like I'm an expert at it. Apparently she'd never had one, bless her heart. How did she live to this long and never have a system crash? And she told me today, she goes, because I've always had Macs. And I'm like, okay, never mind.
And it's true. It's a different kind of operating system. It just doesn't, it behaves completely differently from the Windows operating system. So, yeah.
And so it's like, because she was working on a Windows system, which I knew a lot about, it didn't dawn on her to back up her stuff, and she didn't know you could do system recovery. And so it felt good that I got to point her in the right direction. But when she left, what really felt good to me is that when she wasn't asking and she was just simply going, oh, I have a problem, I was letting her manage her own problem. And then when she'd ask me a question, then I had something to provide, like, oh, well, you might want to call my niece. And then I left it to her and my niece. And then when she was asking another question, then I suggested the backup thing. But then she's the one who Googled. She's the one who found the resource. And I just sat doing my own thing while she was doing hers. Now, I got to tell you, that feels very different than how I've lived my life for many, many, many years.
Okay.
But it felt freeing.
Good.
It felt appropriate. It felt like, as Abraham says, stay in your own lane. I was staying in my lane. I'm doing what's mine to do, which at that time had nothing to do with computers.
Right.
But when she asked, now she came into my lane with me, and where it was a comfortable place for us to be together.
Yes.
I gave her some insight, and then she got back out of my lane, and she went back into her own and did her own thing. And, she's a grown adult, but this was an area that she did not have a lot of experience in. So it felt really good for me to provide her a little bit of insight, but then to let her run with the process so she can learn what it's about, so that, one, either she'll back up next time and have everything, this won't happen again in a way that will be so shocking, or two, it'll never happen again, but she's very now educated on the process.
Yep.
And so it is kind of like the school you're talking about, letting the kids do it at their pace.
Oh, yeah. In fact,
sometimes watching an adult do something that, like, I know I'm really well skilled at, and watching them kind of stumble through it is a little disconcerting to me. It doesn't always feel so comfortable, but it's getting more comfortable.
Sure, and that's no different from watching a kid struggle with stuff. I mean, and the rule that you followed is the exact rule that we teach in the Sudbury School, which is you don't interfere, you don't involve yourself until the student asks you to be involved. And once they've requested assistance, then you can step in. And even then, you always want to try to do so in a way that you're paying attention to what their needs are. So when they reach the point when they're saying, okay, that's enough, then that's enough. You don't keep trying to interfere. And it's a tough skill to learn at first if you're not used to it. But like you say, the results that get produced are just remarkable. The rule of thumb that the Sudbury schools use is you mentioned the word kind. You mentioned how you didn't feel like it was kind to let her alone. And Sudbury schools like to differentiate between kind and real. They're saying that you can be kind or you can be real. Being real is letting them actually do what they're going to do. Being kind is stepping in to make it easier for them and thereby making it harder for them. And I realize that as we're talking about this in the context of the law of attraction and of what the teachings of Abraham are, it becomes clear that it isn't just about being kind or being real, it's about being spiritual. It's about being true to the essence of who you are as a being and letting them be true to the essence of who they are as a being. And it's also about what Abraham talks about as the third law, which is the art of allowing. They literally state it as, I am happy with who I am. This is my paraphrase. And I'm happy to let you be who you are. And that's a big concept.
Like, I am who I am, and you are who you are.
Something along that line. Yeah, I mean, that's a big concept. That's a really, really big concept. It's a concept that flies in the face of so many people, so many different fields of discipline, so many areas of life. I mean, we're not just talking about parents interacting with kids. How often do people in the business world want to go tell somebody else how to do it? I mean, it happens every single day in almost every company.
Well, you know what's really fascinating? I have a coworker that I've been training in some new things, and I can tell that she's insecure in what she's learning, and yet I know she can do it. It's like I kind of listened to her thought process and watched what she is doing, because we're doing this virtually where she's, in another state, but we're sharing a desktop.
Uh-huh.
So I'm seeing what she's doing, and I'm like, oh, she's taken what I've taught her. She's doing it beautifully. She knows the sequence, and she knows how to figure stuff out. But when I'm there and we're talking on the phone together, part of my teaching process is, okay, so we were at a certain stage where I'd say, I want you to do the work, but I want you to narrate and tell me what you're doing, because I want to hear your thought process.
Oh, okay.
And so she was doing beautifully with that. But then she'd go to do something that kind of is like the final step, and she'd go, I'm going to do blah, blah, blah. Is that right? And she was doing that a lot, and I said, I'm not going to answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to be either confident to do it or choose to do something else. And if you do the wrong thing, it's not really wrong, because we haven't sent it off into the email world yet. We're still just building the email. And I said, so I'll let you know if you don't get it right. Don't worry about it, because that's what I'm here for. I'm the training wheels. But I want you to have the confidence to just take the step and do it. But it's been really hard to get her to do that, because in the whole time we've been training on all the different things we've been training, her habitual thing before she does anything is she'll say, is that the right thing to do? Is that the right thing to do? Is that the right thing to do?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to teach her to just be confident and just do it.
That's a really good example, because it also has a very strong LOA component to it, because confidence is such a big part of belief. You have to be confident that it'll happen, because it's in the unseen. You can't see it happening. So you have to be confident. You have to believe. You have to actually trust it's going to happen, even though you aren't sure how it's going to happen. That confidence component is just huge. And so anytime that any of us are trying to help someone from a law of attraction perspective, particularly if we're trying to help them with it, probably the last thing we really want to do is to get in the way of anything that they could be doing to build their own self-confidence. And that's what you were trying to do. You were trying to stay out of the way of their own building of their own self-confidence. And it's hard to do sometimes. It's just plain hard, but it's good.
And so kind of the next step, because the way I train anybody is I have my own plan or my own system, but I also take the feedback from the person I'm working with to figure out what their style is. And so I altered my style slightly, where I said, okay, I think the next thing that should happen is you should do this completely on your own without me.
Oh, good, yeah.
And just send out the email, and if there's anything that you've done that I think could be changed or could be improved upon, I said, no big deal. I'll give you feedback, but I promise you, nothing that you send out, will it be like the end of the world if you make a mistake. I said, I make mistakes all the time just because I'm doing lots of stuff. It moves very quickly, and afterwards, oh, shoot, I should have said blah, blah, blah. So I'll just send an addendum. I'll say, oh, here's another thing I wanted to point out about this information I'm sending. And I said, it happens all the time. And I said, don't worry about it. Just proceed with what you feel like you have been trained to do. Mm-hmm. And what I found really fascinating is her work was really excellent. Like, she's probably learned it, like I've trained about 6 people now in the same process. She's probably learned it faster and better and more, like she's catching more of the detailed nuances.
Oh, good.
Than anybody.
Yeah.
But it's like I had to let her fly on her own for her to start doing it. And she goes, well, I know it's taking me a really long time because I'm thinking things through. And I said, that's okay. Take the time. Because I know when she was with me, when she would say, is this the right thing to do? That was because if she was alone, she probably would have taken a long time to have checked 3 or 4 different resources to really make sure that this was the right thing to do, mm-hmm. where she didn't want to do that in front of me. She just wanted to say, is this right? And then she would do it.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what? I don't care how long it takes her. She's got to learn how to own this process for herself.
Yep.
And build her own confidence level. And so while I'm out this week, I said, go ahead and do the stuff that normally I would do, because it's my job, but I was training her to back me up. And I said, go ahead and do it, and just know that there's nothing you can do that's really wrong, because we can fix anything on the back end when I return. And it feels really good to cut her loose and let her do that. And even though she may not be able to articulate it, I know she's building her own confidence level.
I think it's funny, too, because she said something to the effect in your story there that she apologized for learning it so slowly, and yet just a moment ago you said she was learning it faster than anybody else. And it makes sense, because so often, even when we're learning fast, we feel like we're learning slowly. It just goes to prove that it's all subjective. Time is very subjective, and the experience of it is subjective. And just because it seems like you're learning slow doesn't mean you really are.
And what I know for me, like I said, I've trained about 6 people in this, probably over the last 7 years. But who I was 7 years ago was a big-time enabler, people pleaser. I would not have let somebody else, quote, go and do it on their own as quickly as I have with her, because I was holding other people's hands so tightly, and I wouldn't let them do anything that, quote, is wrong or not the way I want it done. And I've really let go of those reins. And, I've said, you know what, you'll turn this into your process, and you do it your way. And as long as you get the basic essence, covered, we're good. And if you don't change this font color to red or the italics just because I do, oh, well, it doesn't mean the reader of the email is not going to get what they need. It just won't be red or in italics. Big deal. But yeah. Oh my gosh, she said something really brilliant. She goes, I want to be able to do this process so mirroring you that people don't look at who the email is sent from, because our processes are so the same that they won't know the difference. I was like,
That's quite a goal.
Yeah. And I got to say, she set the goal, and she's doing really well. And I do know I'm encouraging her, and I'm helping her feel that she's doing well. I never tell her she does anything wrong. I just say, here's what I might have done, or here's a different way you could word this, but what you did is just beautiful on its own.
Which is a very positive way of doing it.
Well, I know when I started working with her, when she first got hired, I went, oh, my goodness, this person's self-esteem is not there at all.
Oh, yeah.
So what can I do to help build her own confidence? Mm-hmm. Because I need her to do some stuff for me, and I need to feel confident that when I go away, that she can handle it.
It actually reminds me. I'm sorry. It just reminds me, back in the day, way back, the reason that most of my career went the way it did, and it kind of went off in a variety of different branches, was because early on I was one of the very few people who understood and knew how to use a computer, both Apples and PCs. I was good at both of them. And so I just ended up putting it on resume, and I get hired. You know how to use a PC? Fine, hire that guy, quick. It was that kind of thing. Unlike today, where everybody can use a computer. And so early on, not only would I get hired for that, but I would also be asked, could you train some of our other staff, especially in the very first job that I had where they were bringing computers in for the first time. So I had a lot of experience early on working with people who were deathly afraid of computers. And they knew they had to do it for their job, but they were just totally technophobic about it. And I very much had to do the same kind of thing you did in terms of just being very positive and not making any big deal out of mistakes. And in fact, I would do things like say, don't worry about making a mistake. I just made 10 in the last hour, so you're behind.
I love that.
Things like that. And just for that purpose, just to get them to laugh, because I knew if I could get them to laugh, then they'd start to relax, they'd be breathing better, and so on and so forth. And the other thing I would do, I have to admit, I would tell them a lie. I would tell them, there is absolutely nothing you can do to this computer that can't be fixed. There is nothing you can do that's going to lose any of the data. There's nothing that you can do that's going to break it permanently. And meanwhile, I had my fingers behind my back crossed because I knew for a fact that they could, but I wasn't going to let it happen. But I wanted them to believe. And you're right, when you're dealing with somebody who's in a very fragile state, they need to believe very early on. Now, the tricky part, and I'd be curious to know what your take is on this, the tricky part is figuring out when to flip the switch over and say, okay, they're now strong enough to start kind of beating their head against it on their own and just finding their way without me, gently guiding them through that. And finding that place to do that was always very tricky. In fact, it makes me wonder, did I do it too long? Did I give them too much support too long? Because I can think of at least one or two cases where they were just kind of hobbled all the way along. And I'm thinking, geez, maybe I should have been tougher on them and just let them, fumble around and stop trying to solve it. And yet the conflict is that my boss told me, show them how this works. And so, I'm caught in between. How far do I show them? Do I show them the way that the boss wants me to, where I'm basically walking them through everything? Or do I back off to what I suspect I really should be doing, which is just let them try it and make mistakes and fumble and not get it? It's a tough boundary to walk.
I don't know that there's a perfect answer, but I think following your gut instinct is always the best rule of thumb.
Yeah.
I know that when my father passed away and I started kind of doing a lot of things on behalf of my mother that my father used to do for her, one of the things is she loves to write. And way back in the day, she had Word, and she would do tons of typing, but she wasn't yet comfortable with email. So she would write a Word doc, and then I think my dad would take the Word doc and put it in the email to send to somebody. Well, then eventually she did learn email, but somewhere in the process of, upgrading systems and whatever, she kind of lost using Word, and she did everything on email. Well, now I was with my mother in person. I was trying to show her some things. I know it requires a lot of patience with her because she flusters pretty easily. And I am a pretty good teacher with her, and she does say she can learn from me even when she can't learn from anyone else. But I had a lot to impart to her in 2 days before I came back home. And so it was quite a struggle for the next year because, computers are all different, and, if she goes to a different site, what button do you push? Well, literally I'd have to explain what a button looks like and what a button is on a computer versus something else. And it was just trying to find the words was really difficult.
Oh, yeah.
But over time, we managed through it. Well, so it was funny because I was sharing with her about doing this show. And I didn't want to suggest that she listen to our recorded playbacks. I just thought I'll wait and see if she's interested. But on her own, she said, I'd really would like to listen to LOA today.
Okay.
And so I thought, okay. Now here's one, I don't know if she knows this, but at least once upon a time, she didn't realize that even getting to email was her going out on the Internet.
Ah, yeah.
Because we just put an icon for her email on her desktop, and she'd launch it, and she was in her email, which she was comfortable with.
Yep.
But she would say, "Oh no, I'm not ready to go on the internet. That's too scary." So little did she know that her email server was actually on the internet. We just didn't tell her. And so I thought, well, I don't know where she's at with the process yet, but I know that if she wants to listen to this show, she's going to have to go out on the internet. So in the email, I just provided her a link to LOA Today, and I just said, click on this, and then I was going in and I was clicking, and I'm like, okay, it looks like it's only about 3 clicks for her. So I explained, look for the play button, and I explained the play button is a circle in black, and then there's an arrow in it that looks like the play button like you have on your tape recorder.
That's good. That's what you have to do sometimes.
And so anyway, I gave her the instructions, and I received an email from her the next day saying, oh, I tried all of that, but I couldn't find this black circle with the play button with the triangle in it. And then, a couple other things. I tried this, and I couldn't do that, so I'll try again later. But if you could help me, that'd be great. Well, I was so busy that day, I didn't have a chance to get back to her.
It also reminds me, too, I'll just interrupt very briefly. There are a lot of people who are technically phobic who also have trouble running the play button on a cassette player or on a DVR or a DVD player or anything like that. So it's the same problem, just kind of multiplied to a new dimension.
So the next day I get an email from her, and she says, I think I figured it out. I clicked on something, and it looked like the black circle with the play button, and I heard a man and your voice talking. So I'm thinking, she caught our show live. And she goes, I was so excited, and you sounded really good, and the volume was good for both you and the man, which, well, you are now known as the man.
I'm the man. Oh, okay.
But she said, I was so exhausted after that, I turned it off, and I figured I'd come back and try it again later. Which is so my mother, and it just makes me giggle.
Oh, that's funny.
So then she sends me another email, and I'm assuming she did this when it was a recorded playback, and she said, I figured it out, and I listened to the whole show.
Oh, good for her.
Which one, I don't know. Doesn't matter, but she listened to a whole show. And so there was another technical thing, something about, it sounded like she was having interruption in her sound quality, where all of a sudden we'd go in and out, and I'm like, well, I knew that wasn't the actual recording. And so she has my niece who was going to come, and she could take a look at it. But the point is, in the beginning, after my father first passed and I was helping my mother with everything, I felt the only way my mother could progress to the next level is if I stopped what I was doing, gave her my undivided attention, and figured it out for her. But it's been now 4+ years, and what I've learned is she's so much more capable than she ever gave herself credit.
Oh, yeah.
And if I don't come back to her immediately, her natural desire to want to do something overtakes her fear of not being able to do it.
Yes.
And so she starts clicking on things and figuring stuff out on her own.
Right, exactly.
And when that happens, one, it tells me backing off was the right thing for me, and it tells me that she is much more brilliant than she's given herself credit.
Oh, sure.
And now she's gotten to experience her own, I did it. And so the next email I got from her, the subject was, I did it myself.
Oh, that's great. Fantastic. That's really great.
Fun. So I hope my mother listens to this so she can hear what I'm thinking about in the background, even though I'm not saying it to her, that I really trust she can figure stuff out on her own.
Yeah.
And she does.
That's great. That's outstanding. Yeah, actually, Louise and I kind of go through similar stuff because Louise has always kind of struggled with technology. In fact, very early on, I told you how she started the gardening business, and it's been really flourishing the last few years. Well, within the first year or two, I don't remember exactly which year it was, but it was the business actually had 2 different time periods. There was from 2000, I think it was 2000 to 2007, and then there was another time period from 2014 to 2018, and I think there was even 1 or 2 other years in there. I think I'm missing something, but that's most of it right there. And in that first segment, in like the second year, she was just floundering with the bookkeeping. particularly with bookkeeping on a computer. We were using QuickBooks. And she just didn't get it. She just didn't get it. She was in tears over it. And so this was right after we had founded that Sudbury school, and I was trying so hard to just keep my hands off, but she was ready to throw in the towel. She was ready to close the business down. So I had to choose.
Wow.
Do I actually step in and keep it going, or do I let her just shut the business down? And I knew she loved the business. That made it even harder. So I finally went against the Sudbury teaching, I guess against the Abraham teaching, and I stepped in. I said, would you like me to do the bookkeeping? She said, oh, please, would you do it? And she just handed it to me. And that's what we've done ever since.
I don't think that's going against any kind of teaching, because by asking the question, would you like my help? In their response, that's kind of them asking.
Yes.
You know, because sometimes people are afraid to ask, or they don't think, or it doesn't even occur to them to ask. But I think when you step in because you recognize here's a skill set that you have and you can do easily,
right.
And you say, would you like me to do it? When someone gives you a yes, please, you know that that's their asking. And that's how I look at it. It's like, while Louise was struggling with trying to do it herself, I truly believe she was shooting off preferences of, I want someone to do this for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be doing this. Please let someone else do this for me. And maybe it just never occurred to her to ask you. So I believe you were the answer to her question. It's that she didn't ask you the question. I think it was a spiritual, in the ethers kind of questioning process.
Well, there certainly was a spiritual component, because let me tell you, the emotion behind it was powerful. So there's no doubt about that. Now, I also want to say, on the other hand, she had similar issues, and to a certain extent still does today, with using computers. She's just one of the people who has one of these big mental blocks, and she can be facing a screen, and it's got the same kinds of stuff on it that it's always had, but because she doesn't see it where she expects to see it, she gets lost. And then she starts going into meltdown mode. Well, she doesn't do that much anymore, but she did early on particularly. And so what I would do in those cases is just walk her through the little bit that she needed help with, and then ask her to try it and give her the chance to kind of beat her head against it, so to speak. And she tried it, and then she started, when I saw the face start to get all screwed up, I said, okay, now I got to step in. Here we go. Try this, back off. And over time, by working that way, I got her to actually stick with it, because there were numerous times she was ready to throw up. Yeah, well, actually that too. She was ready to throw out the PC. She was ready to just say, enough of this, I'm done with computers. And so it wasn't the most ideal solution, but it did give her enough opportunity to just go at it herself, that she now is a very competent computer user. Is she able to do everything that perhaps like a 20-year-old can do because they've absorbed it through their fingertips? No. But she can still do stuff. She can send the emails. She can do spreadsheets. She can do Word documents. She can do all the basic stuff that you need to be able to do. Is she able to do everything with like can she do an extensive spreadsheet? No, she doesn't have that skill. She's never really needed to have it anyway, so she didn't want to learn it. But the stuff that she did need to learn in order to do her business, she's learned it. So
that's great.
Clearly, somebody who has all kinds of issues can learn. Clearly, they don't require a lot of step-by-step walking you through everything. Clearly, they don't need to have somebody just take over and do it for them. They actually can do it. But sometimes you just have to kind of be there to help them on the stuff that they're about ready to go into meltdown mode on, just so they don't go into meltdown, because meltdown doesn't really help either. They just need to find a way to just believe they can do it. And when they believe it, they can do it.
And bottom line, I think it's important we stay out of other people's business unless we receive an invitation,
yes,
whether it's
very
emotionally shown or with words, where we recognize that there's somebody saying, would you please help?
Yeah.
And then when you do, then it's a win-win for both of you.
That's where the question comes in. Would you like help?
Exactly.
Because if they say, no, I've got it, then you actually stay out.
Exactly.
And you breathe a sigh of relief, like, oh, good, I don't have to do that. But it's true. It's really important to be willing and able and ready to base it purely on whether they've asked for help. And if you really are concerned, you can ask, would you like the help? But they've got to ask for the help in one way or another.
And one of the ways that I know that we would like to ask our listeners for help is to help other people know about us so that the message that we are sharing is something that other people can benefit by. And some of the ways that you can share our show is by telling other people on social media, sharing it with your spouse, telling anybody that you know. That, if it's something you like, please share it with others, and feel free to comment on our LOAtoday.net page and let other people know how you're enjoying it.
Beautifully done. Thank you. That was great. And I also want to remind people, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, well, what are you waiting for? Just hit the little subscribe button. That way you always get every episode that comes through. And that's actually been what a lot of people have been doing, because we're getting huge numbers of people who are watching mega numbers of episodes. I mean, last month it was 22 episodes per person. So thank you to everybody who's subscribing. And Wendy, if they need a little private coaching, that can also be helpful. How do they reach you for that?
They can go to my website at wendydillard.com.
Very simple. Wendy, I think we knocked it out of the park. Let's do it again tomorrow.
You got it. Talk to you then.
Okay, we'll see you all tomorrow here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.